or is Bonnie reading that?
So we'll have you read it. Do you have a copy of it with you or on your email?
I can open
That would probably be better, just because and make sure it's like below her face, I guess, from the framing perspective.
Could you bring it down? Do you see her face?
Mhm.
Okay. I'm gonna take pictures.
And I'll
Okay.
log off before you start. And again, just as a reminder, we don't cut during these interviews in the studio. So Sandra, so you know, when you're taking a break, just make sure you're aware of that.
We will say we are making a break and
Perfect.
still keep recording everything.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Suzanne and the WJLA team. I'm going to log off if you guys are about ready to get started.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
And let me know if you need anything. I'm around.
Okay.
And have a wonderful interview.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Okay. Just making sure. Is
Thank
your
you,
cell phone silenced?
I turned it off.
You turned it off. Okay.
Yes.
Yours is all. We're silenced. Mine's silenced. Anything else from Adam before you?
I think we're good.
I'm going to close my window. 1 minute, please.
Okay.
That'll give me time to sneak out. Is there anything else you need, or?
I think we're good. We're good, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, you're good.
Okay.
Thanks for all your help.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
Yeah,
Holler
we
if you
really
need anything.
appreciate it. Okay.
And then I'll just holler when you're done, and I'll come up and I'll collect everything, and I'll deliver the laptop back.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Suzanne. Can you hear
Hey,
me
Sandra, how are you?
Okay.
well? Good.
You want a snack or water?
I'm good. I got my coffee.
Okay.
So we are having today our conversation, and feel free anytime if something is not okay, you don't hear me well, or you feel any disturbance, let me know.
Okay.
So, I can't see your face so well. So I hope that it's because of the light. I can see everything well.
I know,
The
yes.
contrast you are so white.
I can see myself and it's all white from there up.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I hope that, yeah.
Okay. Are you all ready?
Yep, I'm good on this end.
Okay. So. All right, y'all can start whenever you want.
All right.
We're rolling.
Perfect.
Okay.
So don't let us lose more time, and I am going to read the slate. I hear still noises in the background.
There's nothing really on our end.
Okay. All right, then let's get started.
Okay.
Today is December 5th, 2023. I am interviewing Suzanne Tarika. My name is Sandra Gruner-Domick, and we are in Arlington, Virginia. I hear an echo in my end.
There's no echo over here.
But when I talk, I hear all the time. I hear my own voice.
Do you have your speakers on, or are you listening through the
No,
air-
I am with headphones. But I hear like running water right now.
Oh, I don't know. We only hear your voice on our end.
Okay. Maybe we need to do a break if something still continues that way.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's something we can fix on our end because we're not hearing it. We just hear you.
do you have, you have headphones in?
Yes.
Is
Huh.
our computer speaker?
The problem is every time I talk, when I end talking, it starts to come like a rush and then an echo.
Do you wanna, do you have your speakers on as well?
Uh,
Or do
maybe
you wanna,
if I mute myself, wait a second, let me try to do that.
did you mute yourself?
Yes, and I unmute myself right now, but I muted and I still could hear the rush in the back.
We don't hear it, so, I mean, we're just recording her interview, so, I mean, I know it's annoying to you, but,
It's very
oh,
okay.
cause, yeah, we
I will
don't hear
try,
it.
I will try to do my best.
Okay, okay,
Ignore that.
okay.
I hope I can hear everything well.
Okay. Yeah, we're good on this end, so
Okay.
okay. Okay.
All right. So, thank you, Suzanne, for agreeing to do this interview with us. I would like you to start to give us your name, where and when you were born.
My name is Suzanne Mayer Terrica, and I was born in August 1940 in Nice, France.
Could you tell me a little bit about your life and your parents, about your relatives, and where they are from?
Yes, I must make it clear that everything that I was told is what I'm telling you. All of the information that I have about my birth and the war and the first years of my life, I have no memory of them, but they were told to me. So this is what I know. My parents came from Germany, and my father was a refugee in France in 1935 because he could no longer work in Germany. As a Jew, he was expelled from whatever contacts he had and relationships he had when he was a traveling salesman. So he emigrated to Nice in 1935. My mother joined him in 1938, and they were married in 1938 in France.
Would you please tell me the name of your father and your mother, and where they were also born, or a little bit of the background
Yes.
of the family?
My father was Daniel Mayer. He was the youngest of 8 children, and he came from a little town in Germany at the Luxembourg border. The town was called Bollendorf. It had a Jewish community and about 100 families. My mother was born Irene Levy, and she came from the same little town, Bollendorf. She and my father were actually second cousins. There is a little point there that I want to make. My mother was French, even though she was born in Germany, because her family, the Cahen family, on her mother's side, was from Luxembourg and then originally from a small town in Lorraine. And after the First World War, that part of Lorraine had been German and then became French again. Germany lost that region after the war, and so the residents of that area, going back to the early 1900, were asked if they wanted to to go back to their French nationality, or if they wanted to remain German, or if they wanted to become Luxembourger. And my mother, her family, and her mother in particular, chose to become French. So that's why my aunt was French, my grandmother was French, and it was very useful during the war.
Yes. Keep going, please.
Yes, so they both lived in this little village, Bollendorf, which had a synagogue where my grandfather and grandmother were married in 1910, and it was the first marriage in that synagogue. It was recently built, and my grandfather was a baker, and my grandmother worked in the bakery with him. And that's on my mother's side. On my father's side, his father was a horse dealer, and they had 8 children. His wife was Babette, and she also just stayed at home, and the grandmother lived with them. It was a very happy family life. My father talked about it a lot, about how wonderful it was to have so many siblings. I think his father was pretty well-to-do. Apparently, they were one of the very few people in the village who had a telephone. And but apparently, except for my grandfather, nobody knew how to use it. My father's mother would say when the phone rang, "Wait a minute, somebody's coming," and she couldn't use the technology, but it was a source of pride for them, and so it was a very happy life until the First World War. My father's brother Julius was in the army, and he was killed 3 weeks before the end of the war near Verdun in France. So that was the life of my father's family. In my mother's family, my grandfather as a baker was a very important part of the village. He had a sizable bakery and had many employees. All of them were Jewish. So the bakery was closed on Shabbat. Starting Friday afternoon, they would clean everything up, get ready to close. They would make traditional bakery items for Shabbat, and all of the linens which were covered in flour would be taken to the river, which was flowing right there, and set in the river at a special place that was reserved for the family, and set to float in the river with big stones to hold them, and the flour would just flow down, and by Monday it would be clean, and the lady in charge of the cleaning would come and finish cleaning them. So that was a little detail of the life in Bollendorf. For the special holidays like Christmas and non-Jewish holiday, my grandfather also knew how to make traditional cakes. There was a special time later in the afternoon when the bread that wasn't sold was distributed to people who couldn't afford it, and I think my grandfather was very well regarded in the village. There were two other bakers, but I think he was considered to be a really good person. I know that because we had a reunion in the village in the early 2000s, and I met one of his competitors, at least a descendant of the competitors, and who was full of praise for my grandfather.
Wonderful story.
Yes.
Were your grandparents' side, both sides, religious? How religious were they?
They were pretty religious. There wasn't a rabbi permanently there, but there was somebody to teach the children, and as a matter of fact, that person came from one of the bigger towns in Germany, like Trier, which was closest, and he would be housed at my grandparents' my maternal grandparents, because they had an extra room, and he would live there and teach the children. For the special holidays, a rabbi would come from Luxembourg or from Trier and perform the services. But they had services every Saturday that were run by somebody in the community. The family kept kosher. And interestingly, on my maternal side, my grandparents and my aunt and my mother, all through the war, never ate anything that was not kosher, which was quite a feat because there wasn't much to eat, and probably there were possibilities to eat other things. But they were very observant from that point of view. After the war, things relaxed a little. The store, my father's store, was open on Saturday, and so that made a big difference. My grandparents still went to the synagogue on Saturday morning. They would walk there, and we had a special Shabbat dinner on Friday night.
You were telling about the First World War.
Yes, the First World War was. Except for
you were referring to about the First World War when you were telling about the stories of Bollendorf.
Right. The First World War was the time when the family, my grandfather's family, was affected by the death of one son. My grandfather, the baker, was drafted, and he spent 2 years in the war. He was actually on the Russian front and got a medal. And but apparently he was sick often, and my aunt said he spent a lot of time in the hospital. But he was on the Russian front and came back, and both my aunt and my mother, who had been very little when he left, nobody recognized him. But as soon as he got back, life became normal again, and he worked in the bakery again. My grandmother had to close the bakery because all the men had been enlisted in the army and couldn't work anymore. So she closed the bakery, and she went with my aunt and my mother to Luxembourg to one of her siblings. The difficulties began with the rise of Nazism. My father had to emigrate. My grandfather in Bollendorf were still able to work. But it became more and more difficult. There was much more anti-Semitism, and in 1938 was Kristallnacht, the pogrom, where he was beaten up, where the house was ransacked, the bakery was ransacked also, and he
That was your grandfather?
My
Your
maternal
grandfather-
grandfather, yes. My
And your
pat-
father was,
my father
sorry.
was already in France. My paternal grandfather had died early. He had died when he was 62. He had already died. His wife, my grandmother, was there living at home. She had a helper, and she was pretty much protected. She didn't go out. But my grandfather was attacked and had to walk along the streets, and he was very humiliated and beaten up, and he came home all bloody. And the mayor of the town said, you know, if you want, I can take him and put him under my protection, and we can put him into jail so he won't be attacked anymore. And my aunt said, no, that's okay, we'll take care of him. And she kept him at home, which was a very wise decision. And he recovered, and then they started making plans to leave. My grandmother was French, so she could have gone to France, but my grandfather was German. So he had to leave clandestinely. The river that went along the village was called the Zaur. In French is La Sûre, and it's the border between France, between Luxembourg and Germany. So in order to get into Luxembourg, they had to swim across the river, which was not always easy because there were times when the river would flood and it was a lot of water. Anyway, they managed to cross the river, and my aunt was waiting on the other side, and then my grandfather went into a delivery truck that drove him down to Nice. He had to keep hiding in that truck, and that's how he was able to leave Germany. He and my father at that time did not have any papers anymore. They were stateless because they didn't have a German passport, and they did not have a French paper either.
Can you explain me a little bit when your father, you said, how old was he? Around 38. When he left
Germany?
Germany, yes.
Yes,
Or from
1935.
Germany, where he left.
Yes, when he left Germany in 1935, he and a friend of his had made a connection with an ad in a paper in Nice that advertised the sale of a business space, a small store. And he and his colleague sent some money, and the owner of that store said, okay, we're going to meet in Nice at the main post office. I'm sending you a postcard which I have torn in half. I will hang on to half of the postcard, and you bring me the other half, and we'll complete the deal. And so they did that. They met the owner and were able to buy the little store, which happened to be a paint store, basically, supplies for painters, which neither my father nor his colleague had ever done, but that did not stop them. They were very diligent and adaptable and had a lot of energy. So they started this business in that little store, and that was from 1935. Then in 1938, he had worked for 3 years, and my mother came, and they got married. Now, they had to get married in France because otherwise my mother would have lost her French nationality if she had been married in Germany or Luxembourg. So they were married in France in a little town in Lorraine called Thionville, and they settled down in Nice. My grandparents had arrived. My aunt was there also. Both my aunt and my mother helped my father in the store, And my grandparents lived in a little house that they had rented. We would go to their house for dinner. Often my grandmother would fix dinner, and we would also go there on the weekend. And it was a difficult time because there was nothing to eat, so you had to really look for food. My aunt was the one who would also go out and look in the countryside, make contact with farmers. When I was born in 1940, they had trouble finding food, milk in particular, but finding food for me. But they managed. In 1939, war was declared. In September 39, France and Germany became at war. And all foreigners living in France, particularly German foreigners, were put in internment camps. So my father and grandfather were both taken to an internment camp, which was very near Nice. It's called Antibes. It's a little town, and it had a garrison, and it's in that garrison building that they were housed, and they spent about a year there, and then they were transferred to another camp, which was a bigger one and a little further near Aix-en-Provence, which is close to Marseille, and that camp was called Le Camp des Milles. And it became famous because it had really important people in that camp. It was run by the French government, specifically by the army, and it was relatively well run. The people didn't have much to eat, but they were well treated. The camp had some important people like Thomas Mann's son, Goloman, a painter who became famous, Belmer. There was a Nobel Prize in physics, other painters, other writers, and these people were there for 2 years. However, my father and grandfather, because they were married to French women, were released in 1940. And they were released in July 1940, and they were able to go home to my mother and grandmother just in time for me to be born.
May I ask a little bit about, if you know the details of this, how happened that they were imprisoned, how they were raped, if the family told something about that?
How they were, sorry?
How they were raped, how they were captured and put into
Oh,
imprisonment camp.
I think, I'm not sure specifically how they were captured. It's possible that there was an announcement, a public announcement saying all German alien residents have to report to the police station. And people were very careful to observe the law and to do what they were asked to do. So they probably reported to some administrative office, and that's when they were told, you will be sent at such a date to the internment camp.
Another question about your family was living in Nice for 3 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and your grandparents' mother side came to Nice as well to live with them. What happened with your father's side mother, your grandmother?
My grandmother on my father's side stayed in Bollendorf. She had very crippling arthritis, and she really couldn't go anywhere. She had help at home, so she stayed at her house, and a relative actually came to help her and stay with her. And she died in 1942 of a natural death. Yes, the rest of my father's family has a much more tragic fate. My father had 7 brothers and sisters. One brother died in the First World War in the army. Another brother, the oldest, Moritz, had married late a woman from Luxembourg, and they had a little boy, and they had emigrated when Luxembourg became German. Luxembourg was annexed very early by the German and became a German province. So it was run by the Germans, so people left. And my uncle Moritz went to Belgium, where he had a business, and they lived there for a couple of years until they also were arrested and taken to this place in Belgium, which is called Caserne d'Aussin, which is a military base. And from there they were taken to Auschwitz and they were killed. My aunt, my father's sister, was married to a Luxembourg man and had a little girl, about 12. They had emigrated to France, and from France they were taken and went to Drancy, the French sort of gathering point, and from Drancy were taken to Auschwitz. The other sister, Paula, was the oldest, and she and her husband went to Bollendorf, and they helped take care of their grandmother, their mother, actually. They had one daughter who went to live with the other aunt who was in France and who was taken to Drancy, and that daughter was also taken to Drancy and deported. The oldest daughter, Helen, was able to hide in Marseille, and she spent the war in a small town working for a family and basically in hiding. And she survived the war and went to the U.S. There were 2 other brothers, Max, who came to St. Louis, Missouri with his family, his wife, and his 2 sons. Zali, Solomon, went to Israel with his wife. His sons were born later. And Helen, the one niece that was the daughter of one of the sisters, Paula, went to St. Louis too. So out of 8 children, 4 were killed with their 3 with their families, 1 as a soldier. On my mother's side, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Your mother's side.
Yeah, on my mother's side, it was a very large family. My mother had 8 siblings. Her parents had 8 siblings. My grandfather had 8 siblings or 12 siblings. They were very large families. On my mother's side, they all survived. They were in hiding in the southwest of France, which was a much more hospitable place. They were in farms. They were spread out in the countryside, and they all survived. There was only one person who was killed. On my maternal grandfather's side, There were some deportations, but most of them survived. Yeah, that.
What was the name of your aunt who was with
Who
you
lived
and-
with us? Yeah, she was Martha, or Martha. And her maiden name was Levy, like my mother. She lived with us and worked with us and took care of my grandparents during the war. She took them to southwestern France because my grandparents would not have been able to do it by themselves. My grandmother, even though she was French-speaking, was extremely shy. And my grandfather didn't speak French. So for the trip, my aunt had to put some sort of a big hanky around his jaw as though he had a bad toothache and couldn't speak, to avoid any conversation on the train or anything like this. So they were together. My aunt married in 1949, and she went to live near Bordeaux. She never had any children.
So when you were in Nice and you were almost born in 1940, and your father came back from prison with your
Right,
with his father-in-law.
yes.
What happened then?
Well, we lived in Nice, and the store was functioning. Nice was part of the free zone, but it was still dangerous to be there because the militia and they were really like French Nazis. The militia was very fierce and was looking for foreigners, for Jews. They were looking for resistant fighters. They were looking for communists. They were looking for a lot of people, and they were very violent, very brutal. So you had to be careful to conceal your identity. My father was, first he learned French very quickly. Because Nice is a border town with Italy, there were many people who spoke French with a bit of an accent. My father was also extremely sociable and made friends with many people who had no idea that he was Jewish. They thought maybe he was kind of Italian, or because that was the way the society was at that time. So he worked there for 3 years. Sorry. And Nice was occupied by the Italians. The Italians were allied with Germany, but they did not have the same zeal to deport Jews. They actually did not deport any Jews. They were they were much kinder. Apparently, my aunt tells a story that she was walking with me in the carriage, the baby carriage, and she would pass in front of the Italian consulate, which was a huge building not far from our house. And one of the guards at the French consulate would sneak a little bottle of condensed milk in my carriage saying, "Per la bambina." So this was a period which was difficult and dangerous, but it was livable. Then many laws were passed in France to make France as free of Jews and as Aryan as possible. And among some of these laws was, first there was a census, which was 1941, which was a very big enterprise because people wanted to be on the right side of the law and wanted to do the right thing. They all registered, which means that the government had all the addresses and all the names of the Jews who lived in Nice. And the law also requested any business run by a non-French person to become administered by an Aryan person. So someone was named to run my father's store. At which point he said, no, I'm just going to close the store. And he closed the store. And in 1943, the Italians left. And the place was taken by the Germans. Excuse me.
Go ahead. Do you know how could they sustain themselves when he closed the store?
Sorry, how they
sustain themselves? How did your father did another job or found another job?
He couldn't work anymore. And but I think because they had worked a lot, they had managed to save some money. So they managed to survive. And in any case, in 1943, when the Italians left and the Nazis arrived, they couldn't stay. The Nazis were under the control of Alois Brunner, who was a famous Nazi leader who had overseen the deportation of all the Jews of Salonika in Greece. He had a really bad reputation. He also was apparently a very good organizer, and he arrived on September 8th, 1943, and on September 9th, there was already a big raid, and the trains started to roll towards the east, and Jews were being deported. So that's when my parents had to decide what to do. They put me in a convent. The convent was run by Catholic sisters who took in Jewish children. There were a few Jewish children there already. It was a particular kind of institution because they took care of children, deaf and dumb children, handicapped children. So they brought me there, and it was very difficult for them to do that. And on the way back, it was in our neighborhood. On the way back, they met this friend who was a customer of my father's, who lived also in the neighborhood. And he saw that my parents were really in terrible shape, and he said, what happened? And they explained to him that they had to put me into the convent and that they themselves had to find a place to hide. And his name was François Géribon. He said, oh, you can come to my house. I will hide you. And he didn't even ask his wife. They had one child who was born in 1942, who was still a very close friend, and she was pregnant. But he didn't think twice and said, you're coming. I have a shed across the street from my apartment. We'll set it up, and you can stay there. So my aunt, my grandparents, my parents, all five of them brought mattresses and stayed in that shed. In October, my parents decided that they couldn't stay in Nice any longer. It was too dangerous and it was too precarious. And also, they were putting the Géribon family in great danger, because if you were found to have protected Jews, you were in really bad trouble. You risked prison, you risked deportation, you risked hanging, you risked all kinds of things. So it was very dangerous for them to do that. And also it was really getting cold by then, and the little place where they were staying was just getting too cold. They couldn't stay there. The family, by the way, the Giribon, were then made righteous among the nations in 1998, I believe. So I was in the convent, my parents in hiding, and they made contact with some friends they had who had connections to people who would help you through the border to cross into Switzerland. Switzerland was a place where refugees could go if they had a child under the age of 6. Because I was 3, there was really no question that I was under the age of 6, so that made it easier. Apparently, there were some families where the children were 5 and they looked a little bigger and they would not be let in. But I did not have that problem. So we left on October 21st. One of the nuns and my aunt brought me to the train station, and my parents were there. They were on the train with 2 little suitcases, and we took off for the direction of the Alps, which was not the main line, and we went to Grenoble, where we spent the night and stayed with these friends who had helped us, and they made contact with somebody to help us through the border. So we took the train again the next day and went to a place called Saint-Sergue-les-Voirons, which was a very small train station, which came right after a bigger train station called Annemasse. Annemasse was a big meeting point for people on their way to Switzerland who were trying to escape, and it had really very strict controls. There were patrols, the police, everybody was there, the Gestapo, everyone. So it was very dangerous. So we decided to go to the next station where it was a little easier, and got off the train and went to a cafe called Café Bérou and met this person. And at night, this person took my father, mother, and me through the forest. Apparently it had snowed, and took us to the border, which was barbed wire, and he cut the barbed wire, and he pushed us through. And I apparently started to cry because my coat got caught in the barbed wire, and a man came with a lantern and said, "Don't cry, you're in Switzerland." So they took us to the border patrol house and signed us in, and then we went to another place where refugees were taken and then given a refugee book. And then we were put into a camp, an internment camp in Geneva. And then after a while, we were sent, my mother and myself, to another camp. And my father was sent to a work camp. So we were not together. And then finally, in March, my father was able to request that he be sent to the same place we were. We were in a place called Fin-Haut, which is in the Valais Canton, which was a requisitioned hotel on top of a mountain. It was very high. There was a lot of snow. It was a lovely place, but not at that time. And my father worked in the kitchen, and my mother worked taking care of children. They were not together. The men and the women were separated, and the children were separated. And my mother, because she had signed up for this job, was able to see me more. And my father, because he was working in the kitchen, thought maybe it would be to his advantage, but there was very little food. Part of the problem was that sometimes an unscrupulous Swiss would take advantage of the situation, keep some of the money or the allocation for themselves. So it was a hard place to eat, to find food. So we stayed there until 1945. In between, I got sick and I was taken to a hospital in another town where I was well taken care of. My parents couldn't see me, but I was there for 3 weeks. It was a hospital run by sisters. And my parents were allowed to take a few days off, and they got permission to pick me up, and they went to Lausanne, which was a nice town there. And they had a contact there who was receiving mail, so they could pick up the mail, and there was some mail from the aunts and uncles from America, for example. So they then went back to the camp, and in the end of 1944, I got a summons to be repatriated to France as a French citizen. And a few weeks later, my mother got the same summons, and we were told that we were supposed to go to Geneva and take the train. It enclosed our train tickets, and we would take the train and go to Geneva, and then from Geneva go to Nice. However, my father, who was not French, was not summoned to go to France. He was stuck in limbo. He asked permission from the camp to escort us to the train. So he took 3 days off and went to Geneva with us. And when it was time to leave from the train station, he put us on the train. He went up on the train, and he never left the train. And he managed to avoid all the controls, and I don't know how he did it, but he was on the train. And when he got to Nice, to get out of the train station, you had to go through a control where police would check your papers. So he couldn't go through, of course. So he took me around for a little walk on the platform, and we walked around, and we saw there was this big entrance where people would drop off luggage to be shipped. And they had big doors that were always open. So he said, why don't you go see what's over there? And I went in that area, and he came after me, and I kept going, and I kept going, and finally we were on the sidewalk, and we were out of the station. And so we managed to escape that hurdle and went back to the apartment where we met my grandparents, my aunt, and settled down. The store had not been touched. It was as it was left. There was very little merchandise to sell back then, but little by little they reinstated themselves and started working again. In 1946, my sister was born, and life went on.
May I go a little bit back again and ask you, when you and your parents arrived in Cieles on us and crossed the border, you were separated for a while, and your father went to a working camp which was not close to you. Do you know
Right.
the name or how long he was there?
Yeah, he was there. He was there from early January or late December until March. And this camp was 60 kilometers from our area, and it was in a little town called Sierre, and it was a work camp. I'm not too sure what he did there. I think there was a lot of logging going on. So he could join us after 3 months.